I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. More fallout over Steve Bannon's comments in a behind-the-scenes book about the Trump White House. Bannon's main financial backer, conservative donor Rebecca Mercer, cut ties with the former White House strategist after speaking on the phone with President Trump. Multiple media outlets are reporting that FBI agents are taking a fresh look at the Clinton Foundation. The New York Times also reports that agents are investigating to see if any donations to the foundation were made in exchange for political favors while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. President Trump and congressional Republicans have made repeated calls for an investigation. Attorney General Jeff Sessions launched a review today of a widely used practice of immigration judges closing cases without decisions. Sessions is challenging the use of, quote, administrative closures, which allow people to stay in the country without legal status. They have been a lifeline to some immigrants, but critics say judges too often let people stay in the country longer than they should. And the Washington Post reports that NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers is retiring this spring. Rogers has informed the workforce of his decision and expects Trump to nominate a successor and that the Senate will confirm his replacement. Global News 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti, and this is Bloomberg.
I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Amazon taking another big hardware leap. The first augmented reality glasses with Amazon's Alexa voice assistant will be shown next week at CES in Las Vegas. Plus, Kalanick cashes out. Why the former Uber CEO is selling some of his stake in the ride-hailing startup. And mobile game HQ trivia has turned into a sensation over the last few weeks. But can the company strike while the iron's hot with investors? First, to our lead. The first ever pair of augmented reality glasses connected to Amazon Alexa will be unveiled next week at CES. Amazon is pairing up with Vuzix, a VR glasses developer, to manufacture the device. In a statement, the tech giant said it's excited about the potential of the glasses and the ability to bring Alexa to customers in a new way. And a key highlight of this year's conference, Intel CEO Brian Krzanich set to be the first keynote. And as we've been reporting, a flaw in the design on electronic chips was revealed earlier this week, impacting nearly every single digital device created since 1995. For more, let's bring in our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Mark Gurman, who broke the story about the Amazon glasses. And with us from New York, David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy and our guest host for the hour. So, Mark, I'll start with you. What will these glasses be able to do? What do we know about them? What do they look like, etc.?
So this is what we've been talking about on this show and elsewhere for years now, a pair of augmented reality glasses where I could see what's really in front of me in the real world. At the same time, I could have a little digital lens pointing information into my field of view. The cool, interesting wrinkle about these guys is that it's going to have Alexa built in. So I could say, Alexa, what's the weather? And it'll show me the weather. It'll show me the forecast for the week. So it's basically bringing the Echo Show or an Echo to your face, so to speak.
Let's talk about the price tag, $1,000.
Right, you know, this is the pricing right now. This is where it's at for these headsets. Right now, they're more enterprise grade, but eventually they'll move down to more consumer pricing. You see the HoloLens is a few $1,000s. The Magic Leap we reported is going to be over $1,500. So this pricing is even a little bit below the high end of the market right now. So
cheaper than VR headsets, David, but much more expensive than, let's say, Snap Spectacles, which didn't fare so well. You know, do you think people are going to buy these?
I don't think the ordinary Alexa user is going to spend $1,000 for a pair of glasses right off the bat. But I do think, as Mark is saying, that in effect, you know, if you imagine what is going to follow the smartphone as the next form factor for computing, the best guess anybody has is voice input and some kind of augmented reality output, probably through glasses. So this is a very important thing for Amazon to have in its ecosystem because, you know, they're in a way getting there first with what we would all agree is probably the best voice recognition service, or at least it's up there with Google, and Alexa and Google are fighting pretty well on that. But I think it's an important development. It's not the product per se that everybody's going to get at $1,000, but I suspect many of us will have something like this within a few years.
Now, Mark, as you reported, we know Amazon execs as well as Facebook, Apple, Google will be roaming the showrooms at CES. More interest from the big tech giants there than in prior years. Brian Krzanich, the CEO of Intel, in the hot seat, is still scheduled to give that keynote. You know, what do you think we're going to hear from Mr. Krzanich?
It's going to be interesting because everything that he has to say in that opening keynote, there's going to be a little footnote there, maybe a very big footnote there, talking about this all happening amid this, it's not really a scandal, but this expose coming out about these chips. So I think everything that he says is going to have that being drowned out by, this shadow.
And importantly, now we have heard from Apple saying essentially this affects every single Apple device, every single one.
Yeah, and it was interesting. They really just came out and flat out said it. Hey, everything is affected. We're going to be open here, but we came out with patches in December to take care of it. And what I think is going to be a cat and mouse game that has new exploits or ways for hackers to intrude using this situation. It's called speculative execution. They're going to come out with new security updates as things are discovered.
David, as a consumer, there's really not much you can do. I mean, obviously they're issuing software updates, but there are reports that the only way to really protect yourself is by buying new hardware.
Well, I don't know that the new hardware exists that would really lack this problem. That's one big issue, and I'd be curious to know if Mark agrees with that. But the reality is, we're in an age of tremendous cyber assault and cyber risks, and anybody who doesn't keep their machines and their software and their browsers updated at all times is taking a really big risk. But there's no guarantee. Luckily, we haven't heard of exploits of these flaws in the chips thus far, but that seems inevitable. I think we could see some negative consequences, but it's one of those things you can't really do much about it, so you just have to cross your fingers.
Is there hardware, Mark, that exists right now?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. This is going to be a weird comparison, and I don't know why I'm coming up with this, but I think the issue is very similar to like tonsils, right? Everyone has them, but they could cause problems for you, and you might want to get them removed, right? I had my tonsils removed. This is all the chips have them across the board, and they're going to put patches out to sort of mitigate the problem.
And new hardware isn't going to be fixed until there are new chips.
It's such a fundamental thing that every processor has in order to process data. So there's going to have to be a big sea change in the manufacturing and design of chips for this to happen. And designing a chip, I mean, a new chip takes 3-4 years to design. Remember, this is decades of history that has led up to this. It's going to be a while.
David, do you see any company, any manufacturer gaining from this?
Well, I see a country gaining from this, and I think China has made a top priority of building its microprocessor business for decades, literally. I remember Andy Grove used to say at Fortune in the 90s when he would come in, the country he worried about the most, the place he worried about the most was China. Now they've sort of got an argument why people shouldn't be using the Western dominant products anymore if they can somehow come out with an alternative, which, like everyone else, they're going to be desperately trying to do because their products have these flaws also. But it does sort of turn wide open the chip market because I think it makes Intel look very, very bad because they're the dominant player that allowed this to happen.
All right, David Kirkpatrick, our guest host for the hour and CEO of Techonomy. Thanks so much. Mark Gurman, thanks for stopping by and sharing your personal update about your tonsil surgery. Appreciate knowing that now. All right, me time. Amazon maintained its online dominance during the holiday season, despite increasing competition from Walmart, Target, and Best Buy. According to analysis by Earnest Research, Amazon took 89% of all online holiday spending in the 5-week period starting on Thanksgiving. Walmart was a distant second, talking 4.4% of all online sales. Coming up, former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick finally ready to sell a lot of his shares. We'll discuss how much of the ride-hailing company he is parting with and the timing of the announcement. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Google is investing in a Chinese game streaming service. The startup Chusho is a mobile-centric platform with 90 million registered users. The investment marks the company's second direct investment there since largely withdrawing from the country in 2010. You might remember that Google lost out to Amazon when it bought Twitch for just under $1 billion in 2014. Since then, it has attempted to launch live streaming services for gamers via YouTube. Well, Travis Kalanick, Uber's co-founder and former CEO, plans to sell a large amount of his stake in the startup. You will remember that Kalanick had previously boasted he's never sold any Uber shares, not a single one. Now he will offload about 29% of his stake for a profit of about $1.4 billion. David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, my guest host for the hour, still with us, and our Bloomberg Tech reporter, Eric Newcomer, who broke this story. So why is he selling so much?
You know, he's not the CEO anymore, so I think the insistence that everything's going to be great and it's always going to be more valuable, it's not his job to sell that message to the same extent. You know, this is when he's going to be a cash billionaire for the first time. So I think there's a logic to diversifying your wealth a little bit and making sure that all your money isn't in Uber. If an IPO isn't, you know, until late 2019, that's a long way to sort of cash out a little bit.
Look, David, it makes sense to diversify a little bit. What do you make of Kalanick selling this much and now?
Well, for Kalanick's point of view, it's perfectly rational, and I can see why he's doing it. I just think it's kind of an unfortunate thing overall in the message that it sends about what kind of entrepreneurship we want to reward in our economy. Because, yes, he was a very aggressive entrepreneur who created a lot of value in a company that is transformative. However, he did it breaking all kinds of rules, doing a lot of things that I think were truly wrong and in many cases immoral, and that he should walk away with that kind of money, I think reinforces a narrative about Silicon Valley being essentially, you could almost say, I don't know if the word is evil, but a dangerous place that isn't contributing positively to society.
And some things, Eric, that might be illegal.
Yeah, I mean, there are
essentially
a number
that's
of.
it. This is what the paperwork says. This is his stake.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just sort of hard to. I can see this sentiment, and there are, you know, sort of a number of criminal investigations into Travis. I mean, there, you know, people could go after him, I guess, for those issues now that he has all this money, but. I mean, he had 10% of the company, so at some point he was either going to sell it now or sell it later. Yeah, it's just sort of the reality of his ownership stake. But I totally see the point that, you know, the question it poses about our society is a perplexing one.
You also broke news about the amount that Benchmark is planning to sell. Tell us.
Well, I didn't break that news. Rico gets credit for that one. We broke Travis.
Right.
But I will give them credit, yes. They're selling $900 million worth, 14.5% of their stake. So they still have a ton of their stake left, but $900 million for sale, certainly some cash to distribute to their limited partners and start making actual money off their Uber investment.
And David, you know, all of this means that the governance structure as a result of this SoftBank deal is going to start to shift. And the idea is that Uber will be becoming a more mature company with a more sort of traditional corporate board structure. You know, how hopeful are you that things, you know, really will get back on track and quickly?
I'm actually very hopeful about that. I think that the new CEO, Khosrowshahi, if I pronounced that correctly, really has made an enormous number of very welcome reforms, said all the right things, shown that he really doesn't want to do business the way the company has done business in the past. He's got a lot still to clean up, especially in Europe, where the company's reputation was formed under the earlier regime, and the reaction has been extremely negative. But look, Uber is an incredibly powerful company with an unbelievable market position. I think, well run, its opportunity remains huge. I mean, a lot of balance has shifted towards Lyft in the United States and other competitors globally for all kinds of reasons, but I still have a lot of optimism about Uber's long-term trajectory.
All right, David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, my guest host for the hour, Eric Newcomer of Bloomberg Tech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up, reports that Peter Thiel is potentially eyeing a new media network. What the billionaire investor is said to be working on next. This is Bloomberg.
Percent of the S&P 500 members, MACDs, are signaling
Amazon plans to bid for the rights to stream Premier League matches in the upcoming auction in the UK. The move is part of a broader strategy to bring more sports content to its global Prime customers. So far, Amazon's deals for live sport have focused on tennis and the National Football League, which are not the biggest draws for a UK audience. The Premier League may decide on media partners as soon as February. Well, billionaire investor Peter Thiel is said to be exploring the possibility of creating a conservative news outlet. This according to revelations in the hotly discussed and hotly debated new book, Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff, and a report from BuzzFeed News. Thiel is said to be working with the backing from the Mercer family and a cast of Fox News celebrities. A spokesman for Thiel declined to comment on the matter to Bloomberg News. David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, is in New York, still with us. Sarah McBride, who covers venture capital for Bloomberg Tech, joins us here. So the book has a lot of revelations and definitely a lot of pushback, but what does it have to say about Peter Thiel?
Basically that he's very interested in starting this conservative network. He'd been talking with Roger Ailes, the former head of Fox News, about that idea, but then Roger Ailes died, and Peter Thiel apparently stuck with the idea and has kept pursuing it and is talking to the Mercers about helping him back it.
Michael Wolff also talks a little bit about Trump's relationship with Peter Thiel.
Yes, that's pretty funny. So Trump's MO is apparently to come across very strong at first, tell people they'll be his best friend forever. And Peter Thiel had even been warned, don't take this stuff too seriously. He's very effusive, just take it with a grain of salt. But Thiel apparently believed it was sincere and then was surprised when later he apparently couldn't get some phone calls returned, or it wasn't quite as cozy as he'd been led to believe.
David, what do you make of some of these revelations? Let's start with those focused on Thiel.
Well, first of all, it's interesting that he might team up with the Mercers, because I think Peter Thiel is not exactly a Steve Bannon conservative. He's more a hardcore libertarian, which means that a lot of his views are, kind of different than Trump's. I think I find it fascinating to imagine what such a network might be, and I don't think it's at all out of the question that it might happen, especially if the Mercers, who've been so important in Breitbart, were to get behind Thiel's effort. I mean, we saw Thiel when he was at Stanford start the Stanford Review, which continues to this day as a conservative presence on that campus, and it's a pretty decent quality periodical, and it's very, very conservative. So that might be something he would do.
Very conservative, as you say, David, to this day. Sarah, what are some of the other good stories in the book about the tech community and tech figures?
Sure. I should tell you that there is actually very little in the book about tech, so that puts us in our place a bit here in Silicon Valley. We are not the focus for sure. But there are a couple here and there. For example, Jeff Bezos of Amazon is mentioned, and apparently he and Trump, as everyone knows, exchanged during the campaign. Trump was mad at the Washington Post, which Bezos owns, and Trump talked about how under his administration Amazon would be in trouble for its tax situation. And then after the election, apparently Jeff Bezos called Trump, smoothed things over, and then Trump started calling Bezos an American genius, or words to that effect.
And then we know that actually Peter Thiel is the one who brokered that meeting between the tech executive, that initial meeting,
right,
and the president.
Right.
And these are many of these people who did not certainly support Trump.
Right, that's true. And so that meeting, got things off to a promising start, but it seems that since then there hasn't been, well, compared to the Obama administration, nearly the back and forth between the tech community and Washington as there used to be. There's even a funny story in the book about how afterwards Rupert Murdoch was talking with the president about how that meeting went, and the president said, "Oh, it went great. The tech execs, poor tech execs, they had so much regulation under Obama, and we can fix that, and we can also fix their H-1B visa problem." And Murdoch apparently said back, "Well, you know, actually there were a lot of tech people in the Obama administration, and also I thought that you didn't want to expand immigration. That was one of your main campaign strategies." And again, we have to take all this with a grain of salt, but apparently Trump said back, "Oh, don't worry, we'll resolve that. Somehow it'll be fine."
David, you know, difficult to separate fact from fiction when it comes to a lot of things related to the Trump administration. And, you know, obviously this book, you know, there has been some pushback against it. But, you know, if indeed, and there's been a lot of distractions and a lot of things going on in Washington, but if indeed there really isn't much of a bridge, you know, despite that initial meeting between Washington and Silicon Valley, what do you think the consequences of that are?
Well, you know, it's not good for the competitiveness of the United States because increasingly countries around the world, whether they're our friends or our adversaries, are recognizing that, you know, working closely with the tech sector is one of each country's biggest potential strategic advantages in global competition. And, you know, we luckily in the United States have an extraordinarily effective and powerful tech sector, obviously way better than anybody else's. But it would be very much to the nation's advantage if the government worked with the tech sector rather than sort of against it and obliquely to it and ignorant of it, which I often feel is the case.
All right. David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, with us for the hour. Bloomberg's venture capital reporter Sarah McBride, thank you for sharing those details with us. All right, IBM and Comcast's venture arm will become the largest supporters of an investment fund for startups that help corporations and use blockchain. The startup accelerator, called M-State, plans to invest $25,000 to $50,000 apiece in 5 or 6 companies over the next 6 months. M-State will also connect its startups with Fortune 500 clients interested in implementing their technologies. Coming up, tech firms are scrambling after finding out a flaw in chip processors could make any device made in the last 2 decades vulnerable to hackers. What you need to know to keep your information secure. Next, this is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. President Trump says Michael Wolff's behind-the-scenes book on the White House is full of lies. But Wolff tells NBC he can back everything up.
I have recordings, I have notes. I am certainly and absolutely in every way comfortable with everything I've reported in this book.
The book, Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House, went on sale today, and it's already #1 on Amazon. Well, the Trump administration is imposing sanctions on 4 Venezuelan military officials linked to corruption and repression. The action freezes any assets under U.S. jurisdiction. Americans are banned from doing business with them, and the U.S. has already sanctioned dozens of current and former Venezuelan officials. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley has asked the Justice Department to investigate whether the author of a disputed dossier on Donald Trump lied to federal investigators. Grassley and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina made the request to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Panel Democrats criticized the move as an attempt to distract from the broader Russia investigation. The dossier's author is a former spy from Britain, Christopher Steele. The Environmental Protection Agency's Scott Pruitt is said to be interested in becoming Attorney General. According to people familiar, Pruitt said he would be willing to lead the Justice Department should the position become available. Now, the discussion comes amid speculation about Attorney General Jeff Sessions' tenure. Sessions recused himself from the Justice Department's investigation on Russia's election meddling. His actions went against requests from the White House counsel. The United Nations Security Council is holding an emergency meeting on the protests in Iran. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley says the international community cannot let Iran silence the protesters.
The Iranian people are rising up in over 79 locations throughout the country. It is a powerful exhibition of brave people who have become so fed up with their oppressive government that they're willing to risk their lives in protest.
Before the meeting, a Russian deputy foreign minister said Americans were trying to violate Iran's sovereignty. Well, that storm that pounded the East Coast yesterday was more than inconvenient. It was expensive. Moody's Analytics says the storm is estimated to cost between $3 billion and $4 billion. And while that may seem steep, Moody's says it's actually in line with the cost of most other winter storms. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and more of Bloomberg Technology is straight ahead.
Bloomberg Technology, I'm Emily Chang. If you own a PC, tablet, or a smartphone, you are likely looking for some answers after security researchers this week revealed a flaw in Intel and other chips that could allow hackers to access secure data. Dubbed Meltdown and Spectre, the flaws affect nearly every device made in the last 20 years. So what is the worst case scenario, and what is the tech industry doing to get ahead of the issue? Dmitry Alperovich is the co-founder and chief technology officer at the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. He joins us now from Washington. So, Dmitry, just how serious is this?
Well, this could have been much, much worse. You do a lot of stories, Emily, about the cutthroat industry that we have here in the tech sector. But this is a great story about, for the last 6 months, technology companies across the sector, software companies like Microsoft and Apple and Google, and tech manufacturers, chipset manufacturers like AMD and Intel, and cloud providers coming together and really working very, very hard to put out a fix, a mitigation for this problem that has impacted processors that have been built over the last 20 years. And if this vulnerability had come out publicly earlier, we would have been in much worse shape. However, now most of the cloud providers have been patched, which was really the nightmare scenario, that data in the cloud that we all store in some form or fashion, either from our phones or by using those cloud services directly, would have been compromised by bad guys.
That said, it's unlikely that everyone is going to, use the updates that have been provided. And, there are some who are saying you can't protect yourself unless you buy new hardware, and that hardware likely doesn't even exist. So, what about that?
Well, it's true that in the end, this has to be solved in hardware, but it will take likely 3, 4, 5 years before the new chips are designed and built that will actually mitigate against this problem. However, the software fixes that are available now for most of the operating systems and applications that need to be patched, there are a few that are still coming out, but most of the patches are out now, they can mitigate the problem. The problem with these fixes is that they can have a performance impact on your system. On modern computers that have been manufactured in the last 5 years, that problem is not going to be that significant. It's probably at worst case about 5% performance degradation, but on older hardware it can be significantly worse.
Now, we're just seeing a new report from the Register that Qualcomm processors are also affected by this flaw. How surprising is that?
It really is not, because this technique of essentially for processors to figure out predictively what instructions to execute in order to optimize the execution of these instructions is something that all these processors have been doing really for decades. It's been a standard design consideration. It's not, this particular vulnerability is not a flaw in the code. It's really something that everyone has been doing, and we just now figured out that it presents a serious security problem.
Now, everyone knows about the flaw now. Many people won't update their systems. We don't have new hardware for 3 to 5 years. If someone does take advantage of this vulnerability, what could happen?
Well, there are really two scenarios that we need to be concerned about. One scenario is really systems that have a number of different users logging into them. So this vulnerability is not a remote exploitable vulnerability. This is not like the WannaCry or NotPetya worms that we talked about last year that infected so many computers by jumping from one computer to another. This set of vulnerabilities do not allow you to do that. You need to actually be able to already execute code on the system to begin with, i.e. you need to have access to that computer in order to leverage it to get access to data that you may not have otherwise been privileged to. And the common scenario is really cloud providers and other servers where you may have users already logging in, and those users may not have high levels of privilege, and through this exploitation they can get access to data that they otherwise should not have access to. That's one consideration. The second consideration, which is probably more of a consideration for individuals and people working inside companies that are not maintaining servers, is the fact that browsers are also vulnerable to this vulnerability, because browsers, of course, can execute remote code by visiting a website. JavaScript will be automatically executed anytime you execute a website. So you absolutely have to update your browsers. There are patches now available for all the major browser platforms in order to make sure that when you're visiting a malicious website, it cannot get access to sensitive data stored on your computer.
Now, Dimitri, why did this flaw exist for so many years without anyone catching it?
Well, the actual exploitation of this flaw is very, very challenging to understand. It really requires knowledge, deep knowledge of the low-level operations of these processors. The way that this vulnerability is exploited is really ingenious, because they're really measuring timing differences between executions of instructions and how those instructions are cached. So it's not easy by any means to actually build this and even figure out now, when the papers have been published, of how exactly it works. So it's really not surprising that there were only really a few people in the world that really understood sort of that intersection of processor design and security issues, and were able to marry that knowledge together to discover this vulnerability.
We're just days into 2018. Is this the worst we'll see this year, or will there be something worse?
Well, it's always hard to predict. Cybersecurity, unfortunately, is an industry that always tends to surprise you, and not always in a good way. So I'm sure there will be major attacks coming up. One of the things that we're very concerned about is what we call enterprise ransomware attacks that can take hold of a network, the similar attacks that we've seen with WannaCry and NotPetya, and really hold these companies ransom and get them to pay millions of dollars to get their network back up and running. I think we'll see a lot more of these attacks coming up this year.
All right, Dimitri Alperovich with CrowdStrike, thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining us. Coming up, Mark Zuckerberg has made it a personal goal to fix Facebook in 2018. So, will he incorporate cryptocurrencies in the change? We will discuss next. And this weekend on Bloomberg Television, we will bring you our best interviews from the week, including our conversation with BlackBerry CEO John Chen on the company's partnership with Baidu. Tune in this Saturday for the best of Bloomberg technology. This is Bloomberg. Twitter has commented on tweets by political figures and world leaders on their blog. The social network saying blocking a world leader from Twitter or removing their controversial tweets would hide important information people should be able to see and debate. The company says it reviews tweets by leaders within the political context that defines them and enforce our rules accordingly. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg gave cryptocurrency enthusiasts a little optimism for the new year. Zuckerberg referenced cryptocurrencies in a post Thursday in which he laid out how he will spend 2018 trying to correct persistent problems, including the proliferation of hate speech and misinformation that have dogged his wildly popular social network for the last 2 years. Zuckerberg stated his interest to study the positive and negative aspects of cryptocurrencies and how best to use them on the platform. Joining now with more, Bloomberg Tech's Selena Wang, also with us, Techonomy CEO and guest host for the hour, David Kirkpatrick. So, Selena, Zuckerberg didn't explain how cryptocurrencies might be incorporated onto Facebook, but what does this actually mean?
I think it's important to recognize that this is within his broader context of it outlining what his goals are for 2018. Right now, the ultimate backlash against Facebook is at a high for manipulation, for spreading fake news, and the way that he's framed cryptocurrencies and talking about it in a very lofty, grandiose way really puts a good PR spin on Facebook. He wants to make it likable again. He wants people to trust it. He's framing it as decentralized versus centralized. So Facebook has grown through a centralized system. It's led to a few very large tech companies that control the data of the vast majority of the US population. And now he's saying blockchain, although he doesn't specifically mention blockchain, this new type of technology would allow us to decentralize these technologies so you can bring the power back to the people. It's sort of an interesting philosophical debate, since if blockchain did actually come to fruition, then Facebook would be harmed because they wouldn't even be necessary to spread the information and create this social network.
And several guests on this show have suggested that blockchain could be one thing that could disrupt some of the big tech monopolies. David, what do you make of Zuckerberg saying he's going to be spending time on cryptocurrency this year publicly?
Well, I think it's smart. I think that was a very smart note he posted yesterday. I think it was a necessary step in the right direction, the first of many steps he's going to have to make toward addressing the extreme challenges to his services' presence in modern society. I think it's on the one hand, the cryptocurrency part, on the one hand defensive and on the one hand creative. I mean, as you point out, and as Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures said at a Techonomy conference recently, many people believe the best way to compete with Facebook down the road might be with a blockchain-based system that somehow gave individuals more control over their personal data than Facebook does. And if that were to be possible, somehow it might draw people away, because it's very hard to imagine how you create an alternative ecosystem because Facebook has so much network effects of all the people that are already on it. Now, on the other hand, another issue that's been discussed for a long time is using micropayments to induce people to look at advertising. And it's conceivable that Facebook might down the road be able to use cryptocurrencies for that. So those are just two things that make it reasonable why he should be thinking of it. And there's plenty more, because this is a vast set of opportunities that crypto is opening up to us. The one thing it doesn't mean is he's going to be investing in Bitcoin.
Selena, I do want to ask you while you're here about Twitter now saying they're going to leave world leaders' tweets up no matter what they tweet. How does that fall in line with their policies and their big mission against hate speech and abuse?
So Twitter's had a huge challenge over the past few months, really addressing how in the world do they deal with their policy. Right now, in their terms of services, it says that they are not going to allow users that incite violence, harm, abuse, targeted harassment. And many of their users argue that Trump's tweets have systemically violated those very terms of services. Insults against women. There's been many nuclear war tweets, most recently one even just this week. And now Twitter's coming out and saying, we've said in the past that the newsworthiness of these tweets are part of the reason. And now they're basically again reiterating that after the recent uproar against Trump's tweets towards Kim Jong-un, saying that he has a big nuclear button and that it's even bigger and all of these things. But it's not really helping the situation because they're trying to say that we do hold people like Trump on the same level as an average user, but we just consider it within the political context. Now, a lot of critics say that Trump is extremely important to Twitter's platform. Many analysts in their 2018 preview have said that Trump is the key thing to keeping Twitter relevant, and that any press, even if it's bad press, is good for Twitter and keeping their brand awareness.
David, is Twitter contradicting itself by saying they're going to leave up world leaders' tweets, including President Trump's, no matter what he says, no matter whether it's abusive or it violates the terms of service?
No, I don't think so. I think it illustrates just how challenging is the question of how you reform these services, Twitter and Facebook, because they're sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. On the one hand, people want them to control the nature of speech so that it's more civil on their services. On the other hand, I personally, and I think many of us, don't think it's appropriate that a commercial company ought to be in the position of deciding what is and is not legitimate in the public sphere as a piece of things that can be said. And
right, so but how is Trump any necessarily say it's David Duke?
Honestly, I think government has to be involved in deciding. This is not a commercial decision. The government goes back to something we discussed earlier. Governments have to get more engaged with these services and collectively work with them to figure out what is and is not allowed. Right now, the U.S. government is in a weird position to do that, given our leader. But I don't think that you can really fault these services. I think they have to ultimately err on the side of liberty rather than, constraint. Otherwise, they are really the censors that are way too powerful.
All right, certainly more to debate. David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, you're sticking with me. Bloomberg's Selena Wang, thank you. All right, coming up, this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week takes an inside look at the mobile game show HQ Trivia, how the company is funding your prize money next. And looking ahead to the next series of U.S. economic reports, including CPI and retail sales, we will get earnings from JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. In politics, you have French President Emmanuel Macron in China and talks in Korea. We will have full coverage of these events on Bloomberg Television and radio. Intermedia HQ Trivia may look like an ordinary mobile game show, but it's made some serious headlines in the past few weeks. Each 15-minute online broadcast comprises 12 multiple-choice questions, which start out reasonably easy and get tougher with every round. Those who correctly answer all 12 questions win a share of the prize pool, which currently ranges from $2,000 to $18,000. The purse is paid by Lightspeed Venture Partners, Intermedia's main backer, which has invested $8 million. Joining me now, Bloomberg Business Week's Max Chafkin, who got an inside look into the mobile trivia phenomenon, and still with us, Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick. So, Max, what were your initial thoughts about HQ Trivia when you went to visit?
Well, I should probably start with just my initial impressions, like playing the game, because it's so weird. As many people observe, this thing is so hot that there have just been a zillion think pieces, but it has this weird Black Mirror quality, because it's sort of like there's a guy by himself basically in a room, and you are interacting with him by answering the questions. So there's this weird feeling, but very, very quickly it's sort of addictive. It's fun. It kind of feels like something new, and going there, you just really have the impression of a company that is really trying to kind of capture this thing that's very hot, but they're just still getting their arms around it. I think this all happened really quickly over the past few months, where they're suddenly getting, hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million concurrent users, which is a big number in online live video.
So, talk to us about the potential here, in terms of investment and what, just how big could something like this be?
Right. So one of the sort of blind spots, if you want to say, for sort of online media has been like concurrent viewers. So live television is still really good, way better at the internet in terms of getting a large group of people together in the same place at the same time. And so a thing like HQ is very intriguing in terms of advertising, because if they're able to get a few 100,000 people together at once, then you can show them basically a TV type ad, and that could represent a breakthrough in this world, because right now most of the big video views are sort of happening not at the same time. There's time shifting, which presents problems for advertisers.
David, what's your take on this?
Well, I think Max just said it very well. We live in a time shifted age. At the same time, one of the great holy grails for advertising is a mass market audience. And, this is the best kind of thing we've seen for the internet to compete with television in real time, where you have to be looking at that exact moment in order to experience this entertainment. And that could be very, very valuable to advertisers if it were to grow to the scale of many, many millions, which I think the investors and the company think is possible.
Now, Max, it's not all sunshine and trivia lollipops here because the company, has suffered a number of technical glitches. There have been some scandals associated with the company. Tell us about those.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating sort of case study in starting doing what a startup is like in 2018 because very quickly after Trivia HQ sort of experienced this boom in popularity, there was a report by Recode that one of the co-founders had engaged in quote-unquote creepy behavior while he was at Twitter. The two co-founders sold their previous startup Vine, which is a very successful video app, to Twitter. There were these allegations, and we're sort of seeing the venture capital world kind of work through this at an earlier stage than what would be normal. So normally, startups would never be subjected to this kind of scrutiny, and I think venture capital investors traditionally would just look at it as well, they'll sort it out when they mature. But in this case, Lightspeed, the backer, did an investigation, and apparently they've been trying to raise an additional round. Other investors have raised questions. So we're seeing sort of a level of scrutiny that's unusual for startups, and I think that's pretty interesting. And if you believe that the technology community needs to do better on gender, it maybe is a step in the right direction. The other thing that's happening, of course, is technological. This is a wildly popular thing, and they've really been just scrambling to get the technology to work, and it's led to all sorts of glitches, people not able to play. It's sort of like a little fail whale situation, if you remember back to the early days of Twitter.
Right, something that they are definitely working through. Okay, Bloomberg Businessweek's Max Trafkin, great piece from you, and Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick. As always, thank you for joining me on the show. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.